Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. This is Teams Global Hack, day two, week one. We are back with in the virtual global hack where we build apps for teams.
This is a very exciting session. We have bots, we have AI, everything announced that build we will speak today, and then we will show you live coding. We have very exciting speakers as well. Before we jump into the exciting part of the session, we quickly want to recap. If you're new, this is the Hack Together, the Microsoft Teams Global Hack, and we want to give you a quick brief about what we are doing here. So, Waldek, would you like to just recap what we've been doing and what is the purpose of this hackathon?
Totally. So as you said, this is a hack. So the idea is that we learn, but we also do. We build apps for teams, right? So yesterday we learned about tabs, like what are tabs, what problems do they solve, how you would go about building them, and we even seen like how you can build a Teams tab using Teams Toolkit, GitHub Codespaces, how you can do all of that live, and then we also have seen how you can use SPFX to build a Teams tab that you can host on Microsoft 365. So that was yesterday. If you weren't there, no worries. All of that is available for you to watch whenever you want. So that is one. Today we will have another talk, and we will have sessions today, tomorrow, next week too. Right? One important key date for you to remember: submit your hack by June 15 because we have cool prizes that we really want to give away. So in order for you to be able to make a chance for them, submit your hack by June 15 midnight PST.
Exactly. We will share some details about the prices as well, but a couple of important steps for you. First, register to the hackathon so you will be eligible for the exciting prizes. You can just go to ak.ms/htt/register to register the hackathon, and then you can build your project, submit it, and no project is so small. You can build something to get started. You can build really amazing stuff with AI, SharePoint, and then once you submit your project, you will be earning the digital badge anyways, and you will be eligible for other exciting prizes too. And the second step is GitHub repo is the place to be. You will find all of the templates, samples, and resources available in our GitHub repository. It is the place where we ask our questions, connect with experts, and also engage with others and see what others are building throughout the hackathon. It's definitely the place to be for us. Finally, the prices. Waldek.
Definitely the most exciting parts, right? So we have a number of the different areas in which that we will use to look at the different hacks, right? So of course, AI is a big area. We've seen a lot of talk about AI, and again, today, now in few minutes time, you will learn all about building Teams apps infused with AI. So that will be a category that we will use to look specifically at apps for Teams that use AI. So one. Two, another area that we've got is apps that will help you achieve more with teams. So help you work more effectively, more efficiently, save you time. So we will look at another type of apps. Then we're working together with the European Collabs Summit, which will also choose their favorite hack. And they have a really awesome prize because they will give to everybody on the team that they will pick a retro C64 computer. Really exciting stuff. And then for the grand winner, so the best of the best hacks, the winning team, everybody on the team, up to four folks, will get Xbox and $300 digital gift card. No matter whether you win or not, when you submit your hack, everybody will get a digital badge showing that you took part, you've done some work, and you've built a really cool apps for our team. So definitely join because you have nothing to lose and you can only win.
Awesome. All right. So we have full pack agenda. We already did the overview. Now we have introduction to Teams bots, and after that, we will be seeing how to integrating with the AI library. So we have amazing speakers. Without taking any more time from them, let's introduce them. Let me have David and Scott on screen, and we are happy to hand over and learn more about introduction to Teams bots.
Hello.
Hey, hey, hey.
Hey, folks.
Hi, everyone.
Okay, so thanks, Scott, for joining. Thanks, Aisha and Waldeck to invite us. What we wanted to do is to give you an introduction to on how to build bots using the Teams toolkit. And it's super interesting because Scott is well known to be a really great web developer, a .NET web developer, not only, but a .NET web developer. And we wanted to see how Scott will understand how to build a bot from, an Hello World one. So first, what we need to do, Scott, is to install the Teams toolkit. So the Teams toolkit is an extension to VS or VS Code to help you building apps for Teams.
And that's
So-
going to include the templates that I need, any SDKs, and then everything else will come down via NuGet.
So the way to install it is via the installation of VS is now included directly, in VS, So if I'm sharing my screen, for instance, what you can see is you can use the setup, of Visual Studio, search for Teams, and you will see that you have a specific
Wow.
feature for Teams development. So this is a way to install it. Pretty
Oh,
simple.
that's even easier. That's cool.
Yep. And once you have installed this Teams toolkit, the Teams toolkit, like you said, will help you to build an application using templates. So let's close that now. So now when you will, I closed the wrong window, but let's close this one. And then now let's create a new project. And now we'll have a new type of template over there, obviously. And you can also search using the Teams keyword if you're lost. So now let's name it, hello, Scott. I've said bonjour, Scott. And then you will have many options to create a bot. So a bot.
Let's zoom in on that real quick. I want to make sure we can see all of those choices, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right, cool.
So I guess you know what a bot is, Scott. You know the basic concept, conversational, engine for you. But this is specific bot that will be included in Teams. So yesterday during the hackathon, people have seen what a tab app is. Today we're going to see, bots. We have 3 versions of them available as templates using the Teams toolkit that map to some concept you have in Teams. So the first one could be interesting, our notification bot. What, as the name explains, you will receive message from an external endpoint that will, notify you inside Teams. You have various trigger. You have either a classical one using ASP.NET. You have then Azure function or a combination of that. What is really great, if you're using Azure function, it will use the simulator on your machine, and if it works on your machine, it will work, in Azure. The command bot is what we're going to see together today. Is a way to, to discuss with the bot with specific commands. You could have many commands. You can ask give me the weather for this specific city. Whatever command you may have, give me a report of something. And we're going to start with the command bot. The workflow bot is something more on the automate repetitive tasks like expense report stuff, you may want.
And all of these are web endpoints, right? So whether it's in an Azure function or whether it's what I'm more familiar with, which would be like a core web API, it's listening on a certain endpoint. You've registered that with Teams. Teams calls that endpoint, provides a bunch of context. It then returns a payload of JSON, presumably. So a Teams bot is a web API endpoint. Is that correct?
Exactly. So in our case, we're going to use .NET because we are using VS there. But if you're using VS Code, we have the same type of templates using, Node.js this time to expose the same, web endpoints. So let's create the command bot and see what's going to happen. So it's going to open, the project in VS. And then the way to do it, as you explained, Scott, you have a web endpoint. And to have this web endpoint visible to Teams, what you need to do is to map your localhost, on your machine and make it visible on the public internet for teams to use it. So you need to have a tunneling technology for that. So we will propose various type of tunneling technology, including one from Microsoft in the toolkit. And once you've done that, what you need to do is to right-click on the project. And you see there you have a menu named the Team Toolkit. And you need to ask to prepare some dependencies, because it's a bot, but it's a bot that needs to run inside Teams. And for that, we need to prepare some specific resources. So should have been on focus mode. So let's go back there. And for that, here, we need to take the public URL to make it visible to Teams. So we need to prepare a bunch of stuff for you behind the scene.
Okay. And once you've done that, the application has to be registered with Teams, like your administrator needs to know about it. So if someone tries to just install the Teams toolkit and make this happen today after the hackathon, they might find it's not as easy as we make it look, because their administrator may have their Teams instances locked down and not just want random bots running around. How do we solve that?
Yes, this is a great feedback. So that's why in my case, and when you will install the Teams toolkit, what we will suggest you is to create a dev tenant, so you can really deploy on your own tenant and not to be, to ask to your administrator while during your development phase. And then you will be able to deploy test exactly like a full Teams environment. And once everything will be ready, then you will be able to discuss with your IT department and to share what you've been doing, to share, the various rights you need to be able to run your app and deploy it inside the, the production tenant.
Right. Okay. So the developer's inner loop, hearing what you just said, should be as simple as I make a change and I hit F5. We use our tunneling technology to go from Teams in production on a development tenant to our local web API. We get it right. Then we go from our inner loop of change code, compile, run, change code, compile, run. We then deploy it. We talk to our administrator. It goes into staging, it goes into production, and then the rest of my team can use the bot.
Exactly. This is, you perfectly understood what we're going to propose.
All right, I love it. I'm into it.
So I already press F5 in my case to save a little bit of time. So I create this very same bot. It's working over there. And now, when I've got some suggestion, this is the name of the command. So the name of the command by default is hello world. So I'm going to send the command to the bot. And then it should answer me. Oh. So the beauty of the demo, I'm going to do it again. It's pretty fast. We will be able to do once again. So sometime after, if I'm waiting too much time, the code stops in Teams. So this is the UX you should have.
It fell asleep because you hadn't been there in a while.
Yes, exactly. So what I need to do is to add the Teams bot again there. Then this time it should work.
Now, this is because this is development, local development, but certainly the Teams bot's not going to fall asleep if it was in production.
Oh, sure. In this case, it's because I took too much time. I wanted to prepare and gain some time, but
what about your tunnel? Is your tunnel also running?
It's still run, but I've got error 500, which is not good.
No, that's okay. Well, this is why we want to learn live, right? Because to get this whole thing to work, we want to go and set the whole thing up. Because I saw in your URL, you had teams.microsoft.com. You're using the Teams web client rather than the Teams local client. It goes up into the cloud through the tunnel and then back down to localhost, 5,000 or whatever you happen to be on.
So what we can do is let's do it. Like I'm going to rerun the tunnel. I'm going to follow the steps. So prepare the app dependencies. So what this is going to do is to reconnect the tunnel with the various, registration in the bot portal in Azure. So it's going to remap because, the tunnel URL could change every time. So there is some kind of dynamic change you need to do.
Oh, so then you have to re-register the tunnel. And this is really interesting because the tunnel might have like a GUID or some number, some funny thing
Yeah, this is
that's going to fall asleep.
exactly why. So now, if I'm lucky and it should work, now that I've decided to rebuild everything from scratch.
No, there's no luck involved. It's all skill, David.
Let's hope so. So now we're going to have the bots once again registered, installed by the toolkit,
Let's see.
And now, in a couple of seconds, it will propose me to be able to call the Hello World bot.
Mm-hmm. So when you're in a situation like this, how does one debug it? Do you set a breakpoint? Because if it works with the tunneling technology, you should be able to set a breakpoint and make it all the way in here.
I can set a breakpoint. You're right. It's a good opportunity to try it.
Sure, we're going to learn something here because we don't know if it's making it all the way over there. Now, I'm looking here on the right-hand side, zoom in on those dots. Those indicate delivered versus read or processed. Is that correct? So one of them may have been processed and one may not.
So I don't see any error on the ASP.NET side.
And I didn't see the breakpoint get hit, which implies we're not making it all the way here with our tunnel.
So the issue is probably, and this is maybe an opportunity to show you how to debug if you have one day the issue, is so what the toolkit is doing is going to go there to register your bot. And then what we see is that we have this bot being registered there. And you see we have warnings, so interesting. Maybe so we have an issue, so we can troubleshoot what happened there. And then you can see in the settings, maybe you can check that the endpoint was properly set, and also we have in Azure, it has created like an app registration. So you see that many stuff has happened for you in the background. So there is an opportunity to be able to fix that. So to be able to make it work from the beginning, I think the best thing to do is to take a full new project, create it from scratch, because in this case, what we will have is a completely new bot ID, bot registration. What I need to do is to stop my tunneling, make it run again.
Okay.
We already seen how to prepare the dependency using my identity on my dev tenant.
Right.
So this is the beauty of demo. People will be able to also learn from that.
There's no such thing as a demo fail. The demo gods don't care either way. This is about debugging, because if you had simply pressed F5 and it worked instantly, then someone who didn't have that wonderful experience might be frustrated and not learn. But here we're going to learn how to do this. And this is also a great opportunity for me to better understand how this works, because a Teams bot seems like this opaque thing. You talk to it and it talks back, but it's a website, it's a function, it's an HTTP REST API, it's an endpoint. That endpoint has to be running, accessible, have the correct identity, and be understood and registered by Teams here. So right now I can see that you're logged into your Teams and we're waiting for something to pop up. Presumably it'll be the manifest. There you go.
Exactly.
So there's your manifest. And let's point out that it says this app is not from your organization. That's because we're developing right now.
Exactly. And what probably has happened is I wanted to prepare, everything, and I decided to remove, some registration to clean the stuff. And maybe I've done an issue. So, like you said, it's for people. It's a great way to learn what you shouldn't do or how to debug if you had an issue.
Of course.
And now I turn the hello world, and this time it's
Yay.
working. And
okay, what do you think was wrong, though?
I think the issue was where I was sharing there is in the portal, so that is more beautiful to look at. I wanted to clean, a little bit, just to avoid to have a mess, because it's a dev tenant. So sometimes it's a little bit of a mess. So I decided to clean it before. And I guess this is where is coming the issue. So the issue is probably like you said, we have a public endpoint and we have the tunneling technology, but to map everything, we need to ask to the to the registration part to explain to teams where to call the public endpoint. The public endpoint will use the tunneling technology to go to my localhost. If the links is broken, I think it was broken there.
Okay.
That's why
So-
Teams was calling the API, but nothing was returned.
All right. So now Teams knows about the public endpoint. The public endpoint then gets routed to your local machine. And we
Yep.
literally just chatted a Teams bot in Teams, hit the breakpoint inside of your local .NET application. So now we have the basics of a Hello World bot, and you hit that bot controller.
Yep. So we can show the breakpoint if we like. Now we can set the breakpoint. We can go
Okay.
back to the same and send the same command, hello world. And you see,
Boom. Look at that.
this is my localhost, but I've been triggered by the public endpoint. And you have then, like you explained, the classical debugging experience using VS before deploying that later on in your IT department.
Right. And so what's great about this is that you notice that he put a breakpoint on line 35 there, which is going to be loading up what's called an adaptive card. So if you switch back into Teams, you'll notice that it didn't just say hello with a string. It said hello with this lovely card. And that
Yep.
card that popped up is called an adaptive card. And we haven't talked about those yet.
No, and what would be a great transition is to show an even better adaptive card.
Better than Hello World, David?
Yeah,
Say it ain't
better than
so.
Hello World.
Quelle surprise. Let's do it.
So this time we decided, with Aisha and you wanted to upgrade the Hello World sample to use, an API that is useful for you. And we're going to call the command there. And this time, I've been deploying it into Azure. So I'm sure it's going to work because it's not, using a dev machine. And we have a different adaptive card this time that's going to show, your blood sugar level using a simple command. And I would love to know how you managed to build that, Scott.
Right. So I have this thing on my arm here. If you see the back of my arm, this is a blood sugar sensor called a Dexcom. It uses Bluetooth and has a needle in my arm. That gets my blood sugar, sends it to my phone. Then I send it up to a Mongo database using an open source project called Night Scout. So I have a REST API for my body that tells me what my blood sugar is. And people who know me may have seen me talk about this before. I've got it in my Git prompt. So when I'm at the command line, I can see it because I always need to be aware of my blood sugar. But we thought it would be really cool to have that in Teams as well. So I worked with Aicha on your team, and she created a Teams bot that would call that endpoint, which returns JSON in that custom open source format that's called Night Scout. People can go and Google with Bing for Night Scout and learn about that. And then she's brokering between their JSON format, reformatting it into a lovely adaptive card with a chart, and then sending that to Teams. So now I don't have to leave Teams to see my blood sugar, which I think is just lovely.
Cool. I would love to see the code now.
Yeah. Just zoom in on this real quick. I just want to look at how nice this adaptive card looks here. Because one of the things that I thought was really cool that Aicha did was that she creates a chart here from an existing open source project. That chart is actually an image. So you could generate an image dynamically and return that into the Teams bot. So you have a lot of flexibility. And I didn't know that was possible, that level of flexibility in adaptive cards was possible, which is pretty slick. And it looks like my blood sugar is pretty good. So yeah, let's switch over to my monitor. And then I'm going to actually do something funny here. You notice that when I turn my head this way, I'm looking outside because of the direction of where my monitor is. So I'm going to go ahead and just flip myself, and I'm going to point this way. So I've turned myself horizontally so I can refer to my monitor here. So we've got our blood sugar chart service here with the blood sugar that's running up in the cloud. And then we've got this get chart URL, which is using an open source project to generate that chart that we talked about. And we get the data from the Night Scout API. So this is my API. That's not Teams. We get the last, 10 or 20 blood sugars. And then we format that. This SGV is serum glucose value, blood sugar, fancy word for blood sugar, do a little bit of link on that, and then generate the chart. So this chart right here, we'll go ahead and collapse this chart, comes back and we get a short chart URL. And we want to remember that because that chart URL is going to become the image URL that we're going to use when we describe our adaptive card. Now, adaptive cards are expressed in the form of JSON. And you can actually go to adaptive card, I think it's adaptivecard.io. You can create one of these adaptive cards, debug it, and get it all laid out the way that you want. And then you'll notice that what we're doing here is data binding, description, chart, putting that blood sugar information in that. Adaptive cards can look like anything. They're way more flexible. That's why they're adaptive, right? And then the command handler here, and this is actually still called, surprisingly, Hello World command handler. And this is important because it's not that far away from Hello World, right? The Teams bot that our friends that are watching who want to do the hack are thinking about, they can start with Hello World because Aicha and I also started from Hello World. We just never renamed the command handler and then changed it to blood sugar check. So when I say blood sugar check in Teams, it's a regular expressions trigger that's going to watch for that. The pattern is watching. And it's interesting because I'm talking directly to the bot, but is it true, David, that I could add the bot to a group chat and people could check my blood sugar if I chose to?
Yeah, exactly. Like during the development phase, it's only for you, but like you can expose that to anybody in a group channel.
Right. And you see here it says use to trigger the command handler. It used to look for the text hello world, which was what you showed me. We were able to just change that to blood sugar, right? And then here's that adaptive card, right? Here's our regular update. There's the notification. And remember that chart URL right there. That's the image of the chart, which is super cool. And then when that got returned, this is what's really clever. It's so clean. You just say that this is a MIME type. MIME type is a multimedia internet media extension, MIME. That is the MIME type for adaptive cards, which Teams bots know how to understand. And you just package all that up into an activity command response. So the whole thing, I'm going to zoom out and just kind of like look at it. It's really just about 40 lines and most of it's spaces. But I noticed, David, when I went over here, it didn't feel like 40 lines. I found a bunch of stuff in this Solution Explorer here. Is it a lot of code or is it not a lot of code?
Oh, this is an interesting question. So we've seen that the toolkit was able to scaffold code at the beginning, to register stuff, and this is where I fail and I fix it, and then you had the logic in your case. But once you would like to deploy into Azure, this time we can also help you by provisioning some resource, in your Azure subscription, and then we can deploy it. So we've seen at the beginning that you can use either, ASP.NET classical web APIs or Azure Function, which means that it's easy then for us to push that to Azure. And then you will be able to switch from your local, build to a production build in a super easy way. And this is what I've added for your bot to be sure that it would work for today. I deploy that into production using the Teams toolkit.
I see. So we can look and see these bicep templates. Bicep templates turn into ARM, the Azure Resource Manager templates. And we can see that we're using a simple web app SKU, which means I have a web app. I run my website, hanselman.com, on a web app. I could deploy this to the same web app if I wanted to, and then work with my Teams administrator to get my bot deployed securely into production if I chose to do that. So these look scary, but they're really just deployments. I suppose I could probably do the deployment manually, but it's nice to have a bicep template because I would want a Google action to have this bot deployed correctly.
Exactly. So people can then customize it. So the Teams toolkit is an open source project. So we wanted to also to be transparent with people so people can see everything they have, in their hands. But by default, most of the time we try to cover you with some defaults if you're okay with that.
Yeah. So this is really, really clean. I was really impressed with the work that Aisha did. It gave me something to build upon. So now I could start putting in things like intelligence into my bot. I could say, what's my blood sugar at lunch? Or how has it been lately? I could become a reporting bot. and this could potentially be open sourced, and then the Night Scout open source project could plug Teams in so that I could, even if I had a child with diabetes, that child, I could check on their blood sugar from my work system. So there's a lot of flexibility here. Not a lot of code for quite a bit of payoff. I was pretty impressed.
Cool. And like you said, now we can insert more intelligence, and we decided to show you the introduction with Scott. What was really interesting is Scott was able, as a web developer, to understand most of the concept. He wasn't lost, because you can deploy to Azure, and all the concept was relatively easy to understand. And then if you like to go even further and inject the magic of AI, it's the time of other people to show you that and how to use the magic of AI. Thanks a lot, Scott, for your help, and be supportive during my fails.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your hard work, both of you, David and Aisha.
Thank you so
Aisha.
much. Amazing session. And I actually got a lot of help from Copilot when adding those comments and stuff. So I wasn't the only one writing the code. Awesome. Thank you. So let's move to the next session. We've seen now how we can get started with Teams Toolkit when building bots, but now we will talk about how we can integrate the new Teams AI library. Let me introduce you Sid and Joey. They will be introducing us what is Teams AI library, and everything we announced at Build, we will have a quick recap. Okay, so over to you, Joey. Sid, welcome.
Yeah, thank you for having us. Very excited to chat today. Going through that last session was fantastic for myself as well. I was kind of frantically scribbling notes, but turning our attention towards now injecting AI and intelligence into the types of experiences you just saw. I kind of wanted to start and lay the groundwork by just talking about, as a platform team, what our approach was for building interfaces into AI. So just kind of a quick introduction. My name is Joey Gluck. I work on product on the Teams platform, and my team owns the product side of bots and message extensions and adaptive cards. Some of the components you just saw, and now increasingly our interfaces and tools for AI. And I'm joined today by my engineering counterpart, Sid. Sid, you want to intro yourself quick?
Hi, folks. I am Sid. I'm a group engineering manager in Teams Extensibility. I'm also, writing a lot of code, but excited to be here, and let's get into it.
Yeah. So again, I wanted to kind of frame this conversation to give everybody a peek behind the curtain as to how we're thinking about building these interfaces to AI. And ultimately, our goal was, okay, we understand there is a massive opportunity for all of our developer community with these large language models, and I'll specifically talk about large language models today. When I say AI, I'll use those terms synonymously. And so as we set about approaching this, we thought the only way to kind of build the rich kind of conversational tooling necessary to actually harness AI was to build a new framework. And we can approach this new framework in a few different ways. I would say AI is this kind of opportunity as a developer to rethink how we're all writing code. We've kind of reached this interesting epoch in technology where code has become this mix of both deterministic code as we understand it, and now increasingly probabilistic, because we're leaning on large language models to handle some of the experiences that we're powering. And for that reason, as we thought about building interfaces, we could kind of approach it a few different ways. And I think it's easiest to summarize our approach as a platform into two big buckets that, if you attended Build, or if you've kind of seen some of the announcements from Microsoft over the last few weeks, you've probably heard about one or both of these approaches. On one end, we're building a system of plugins for Microsoft 365 Copilot. I'm not going to spend too much time today talking about plugins, because these are still a work in progress and these things are coming soon. But essentially, the idea there is Microsoft has a model. Microsoft has experience around interacting with a Copilot, this new technology that's going to exist across all of M365. And we should allow people to bring their experiences into that kind of centralized orchestration layer of intelligence that users will expect to go to. And you'll see more information about this in the coming months. I just wanted to tease it briefly here because it's 100% something you'll read about and something our team is focused on delivering. But today we're really excited to talk about something that's available right now, and you can see the link in this slide, and that's the Teams AI library. So this is a new interface that we've built for Teams apps as they exist, the model as they exist today. So bots, message extensions, adaptive cards, and so on. And it's really just a way to hook your app experience into these large language models. And I think the best way to kind of visualize this and set this up before we go into technical detail is to kind of show you some examples. So before I jump into that example, again, really encourage you to check out the library that I'm about to go through. You can see the URL here. You can search for it, Teams AI library. You'll find lots of documentation and tutorials of everything we're about to talk about. But let's set things up. So as you just saw with building a bot, Teams has had bots from the very beginning as our platform. And typically how these bots are built is a bot developer will declare to us a list of commands that the bot expects. A user will input one of those commands, whether they're talking directly to the bot or whether the bot is running in a group chat like David and Scott talked about a few minutes ago. But really, the user has to understand how the bot talks, not the other way around. And that's because, historically, natural language processing, NLP, is really difficult, complex, and expensive to build. So the model can look something like this, right? So you might expect a bot to be running in Teams. And again, you saw this in the sample earlier. Here's a list of things that bot can do. So again, as a user, these are useful things. I can create a work item, I can assign it, I can find recent work items, and so on and so forth. But again, I have to kind of understand the bot's language. This isn't my natural language, and certainly not part of kind of the flow of conversation that I might otherwise be having. And so with the AI library, we're trying to kind of turn that model a little bit and make bots genuinely conversational. We want to allow bots or apps to kind of register their skills with us the same way they do now, that list of commands, find recent tasks, assign a task, things like that. But build the right AI tooling to just let a user talk to the bot in their own words. And our new library will help extract the user's intention from that natural language and map it to one of those commands. So if I back up actually a slide, let's assume this app can do assign, create, and list items. Instead of a user actually typing that exact set of strings, let's look at what an interaction might look like with the AI library. So here we have a group conversation happening. This is the flow of natural conversations. The natural conversation, we talk about cupcake, ipsum, dolor. But here's the dream team is together. They're collaborating, right? And that's human beings. And at some point, we're trying to introduce this library such that bots are also part of the conversation, such that I can say, you know what? Something just happened where I was told I need to review a deadline. And that means I got to do something in Azure DevOps. In this example, Azure DevOps is the bot we're talking about. So the user just pulls the bot into the conversation and talks to it as they naturally would. Hey, can you give us an update on open items for Project Ruby? They didn't say list items, Project Ruby in some kind of rigid command format. They said it the way they talk. And the AI library was able to extract their intent, run the list items command in the backend, and return those items from Project Ruby. And one thing that's really cool about the library is just like conversations naturally occur, you can continue the conversation from there. All right, I found the item I need. Hey, who can help with the bug where compose breaks for 640 pixels, right? So now we're referencing a result from the last command that I gave it without explicitly kind of resetting the conversation. And the AI library lets the bot flow that from there. All right, I found the 640 pixel work item. Do you want to assign it to somebody? And the user can actually start to take action at that point. Sure, go ahead and assign that bug out to someone else. So you can see there how natural and fluid this interaction with a bot is. And I think we believe in 2023, that's going to be the expectation for any kind of bot or conversational app experience that people find when they're chatting with their colleagues or just in their life. Like they're going to expect things to be fluid and natural and not kind of rigid, commanding. And so with that in mind, we can get into more technical detail here, and I will trust Sid to take over at that point. So Sid, go ahead.
Thanks, Joey. All right. So let's talk about how all of this works and how do you integrate with Teams AI library inside your bot and empower your bot to process user commands and deliver intelligent responses, like Joey teased a little bit earlier. So first up, what is the AI library? It's a team-centric interface to large language models. So you can use techniques like prompt engineering, and the AI library would do the work of running the prompt, figuring out what are the right appropriate actions to call on your bot. And these are actions that you can register. And you can point our library to OpenAI's models or the Azure OpenAI models as well, or you can even bring your own model. So fairly open and very straightforward to integrate with it. So let's talk a little bit more about what are the high-level steps involved in integrating with the AI library. So first up, you will instantiate the necessary AI components that we'll talk about in a bit. Once you've instantiated the AI components, the next thing is to look at the application object. This is where your bot logic resides. This is where you're writing code to handle incoming messages, process user input, and handle all the actions triggered by AI. And I'll talk about that as well. So with this in place, so you've instantiated the components, you have your bot logic. Now you get into prompt engineering, and we'll touch into that as well. And that's a lot of fun to work with. But basically, prompts define the AI's personality, its behavior that you are hoping to leverage in your bot. And finally, you implement your bot's actions, which will be invoked by our library based on the responses from the AI. So let's get into the details of this now. And first up, let's look at the AI components. So when we're talking about AI components, there are three main things to keep in mind. The first one is the planner. We'll talk about planner a little bit more, but as the name implies, it is where we have our logic for figuring out what are the right set of actions to invoke to handle the user's intent. Next, you will instantiate a prompt manager, and by default, the prompt manager we provide has powerful features like templating inside the prompt text as well as prompt chaining. Third, and very important, especially in enterprise, is we do provide moderation out of box. So there is a moderation component that hits the OpenAI's moderation endpoint, and you can use it to moderate the incoming messages from users as well as the outgoing messages from your bot. And you can pick and choose whether you want input or output or both. So these are the three main components. So you have your planner, you have your prompt manager, and then you have your moderator. So now let's get into the bot logic piece of it, the application object. So this is where you have to first decide what storage provider you want, and that's relevant because of where the conversation history would be stored. And conversation history is quite important in this case to handle ambiguity, like one of the examples Joey mentioned earlier, and I'll show that in a bit as well. When you say, can you change that, or when you're referencing something, history is what allows the AI to know what you're referencing. So this is fairly important. So you can use in-memory or store it in Cosmos DB, use any of the storage providers supported by bot framework. And then in the application object is where you provide the logic for processing each incoming message. So this is sort of like the breakpoint thing that Scott was showing earlier. So this is where you have your logic, and then this is where you're asking your application component to handle the incoming message that just came in. All right, so these are the basics. And now we get into the fun part, prompt engineering. So most of us who are building stuff with AI, this is where we start. You go to the OpenAI playground for prompts, and then you try to get your prompt figured out over there. So start over there, and you can mess around with different properties over there. Choose a model and try to get something working there before you get into the code. And we'll get into the specific kind of prompts that we support inside the AI library as well. So the default prompt manager that I mentioned earlier, it organizes prompts into folders, and that's really powerful for the reason that this allows you to separate your prompts, and you can hit them depending on the scenario you're dealing with. The other thing is, alongside a prompt, you can provide a config file. And in the config file, you can configure various properties that we should use when we're hitting AI to run your prompt. So properties like the model itself, the temperature, and max tokens. So I'll talk briefly about temperature. So temperature is the degree of creativity. That's an easy way to think about it, that you want the model to exhibit while processing your prompt. So yeah, so these are the two files, escape prompt and config.json. Escape prompt is where you would paste your prompt that you got from the OpenAI playground. and config is where you would replicate the properties that you were happy with in how your prompt was working in Playground. All right. So at this point, you have your application wired up, you have your prompt, and now we get into actions. So before getting into the application actions for your bot's business logic, the actions I wanted to talk about was the flagged input action and the flagged output action. These are the actions that are triggered when a moderation fires. So flagged input action is the action that would be triggered when the OpenAI moderation endpoint detects something problematic in the user's input, and the flagged output action is the thing that will be triggered when your bot is saying something that you've decided could be problematic. So these two are important. You always want to have them for enterprise applications, obviously. Um, so now let's get into the specific kind of prompts that really our library is all about. So these prompts are do say, still looking for a better name, but the idea is that you're guiding the AI upfront. You're telling the AI what it is in this specific scenario for your bot. So this is with an AI assistant. And in this specific example, the bot that we were building was for turning lights on and off. So this happened to be one of the first bots that we built that gave us really the insight of how powerful this whole thing is. So this is where you guide the AI. This is very important because of how all the models work. You want to steer the AI so that it will generate completions that make sense for your scenario. So it's a conversation with an AI assistant. The assistant can turn lights on or off, and then you're asking the AI to always respond in JSON. And it's probabilistic, so there may be issues, and we have some stuff in our library as well to make sure it always returns JSON. But this is where you're orienting the AI. Like, this is what I'm looking for. You are a bot for turning lights on off. I always want JSON. And then you're giving an example of the kind of response in JSON you're looking for. So this is the plan. This is what is kind of the key thing that makes the whole thing work. So you're saying, this is the kind of thing I want you to return. It's a plan, an inside plan. There are commands, and a command can be a do or say, and a do command has an action. So, and then you declare, okay, these are all my actions. So if you take a step back and look at it, it's pretty fascinating, right? You're basically guiding computer using natural language, right? It's, this is what I want you to do. These are all the things I can handle. I can handle lights on, lights off, and pause. And then there's the third thing where you're saying the lights are currently, so our library is able to make function calls into your bot and then get the result of that function, put that in the prompt. So this is powerful in that this allows you to augment the prompt that's going to AI with contextual information. So you could even insert information about the user, or in this case, the lights are on or off. But this is where your prompt can depend on the specific interaction that's taking place. And then you're saying, always respond in the form of do and say. All right. So this is the main thing. This is you would iterate on this inside the Azure AI Playground until you're happy with, it's doing all the things you want it to do. But this is what the prompts look like, and you need to make sure there are actions inside them. All right. So now let's work through a demo. Over here, we're asking the bot to turn the lights on. And you will see that so lights on square brackets is the action it identified, and it said the lights are now on. Good. It's not that impressive, but it's pretty cool. Then you say turn the lights off, it turns the lights off as well. And now we'll do the referential thing where we won't say, we're just saying turn them back on, pause, and then turn them back off. So in this case, what is them, right? Imagine handling that before we had GPT, it was quite hard. So because of history, all of this works. And also in this case, there are three different things you're asking it to do. It's able to figure that out as well. All of this was much harder before. So it turns lights on, says lights are on, pauses for 2 seconds and says, I pause, and then turns the lights off. So these things in square brackets, these are typically not the things you'd have going into the conversation with the user in Teams. This is what our library handles and calls the action handlers in the bot logic. So I'll show that as well. But the takeaway here is because of our AI library, you're able to integrate with LLMs more easily. And this gives the superpowers to your bot where it's able to handle these ambiguous intents, as well as it's able to chain commands. And it's also able to handle variations in what the users might say very easily. So, turn the lights on, or you like, hey, why is it so dark here? And it would say, do you want me to turn the lights on? So these sort of things were much harder to handle before. It's much easier now.
It's it. I would add, I was playing around with the Lightbot one time and I wanted to push it to see how much it knew about language and could still translate it to those two simple actions like you showed. And I asked it to flash the lights and it understood what that meant. And it executed lights on, lights off, lights on, lights
That's
off with a
crazy.
pause in
Yeah.
between. It was amazing.
Yeah. It's well, so we all know the "We Will Rock You" song. I've even made it to "We Will Rock You" where it'll pause based on so it's awesome. All right. So now the action handler. So lights on, lights off. Those are things in square brackets. Those are not the things you want to send to the conversation with the user. Those are the things that our library will intercept and call the handlers you've registered with us. So here are the examples. So this is how you would say if app.ai.action lights on. This is the code I want you to execute. And in this code, in this case, we are, the posting the message into the conversation with the user. But this is where you could actually use, some sort of smart lights API to actually turn lights on or off if that's what you were building. The other thing I would point out is the return value here decides whether the actions will be chained or not. So if there's an action where you want the chaining to stop, you can just return false, and we would stop executing the subsequent actions the AI wants to be executed. So these are the three actions here: lights on, off, pause. Typically, these are the kind of actions you would have in your bot logic as well. So one thing I wanted to mention was the rate limited action. So if you're on a free tier, it's possible you'll get throttled. And in that case, you can also register an action for rate limited action where you can, return a message to the user if you would like. But there is a way to know when you're getting throttled. All right, so now let me hand off to Aicha, who's going to walk you hands-on with some code that she's written to add AI into a bot. Thanks, Aicha.
Awesome. Thanks, Sid and Joey. Now, in this part of the session, we've learned everything about AI library, how we can create a bot from scratch. In this point, we will create a bot from scratch and integrate with AI library, and we'll see how easy it is to use Teams AI library into a basic bot. Okay, so let's get back to, let me quickly share my screen. And we will create a bot using Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. We will use TypeScript, and then we will give it a name as Chef Bot. And once it is ready, Teams Toolkit will scaffold my project. And first things first, we have to go to Teams Toolkit and log in with Microsoft 365 account, which has side loading enabled. And then we have to, I will hit debug and show you what is the basic bot. Currently in the basic bot, we have only two commands, which are welcome and learn. These actually return basic adaptive cards. So these are pretty straightforward. As Sid showed, it is not replying to them or anything custom. Once my app is ready to debug, it will pop up on the browser with Teams, and then Teams client will bring my app. And then I will add my app to Teams to test out. So don't forget, this is the basic command bot at the moment. I will add my bot to Teams, and then I can test it out with two commands. Bot already sends me the welcome card, and I can ask learn. And it will send me another adaptive card. So this is pretty much what it can do at the moment. Let's add Teams AI library into it. I will start by adding my OpenAI key, and I will use OpenAI key for this one in the environment variables, and then I'll install the Microsoft/Teams-AI, which is the package. Let it install, and then let's start adding some Teams AI library components into our bot. I will go to index.ts, and first I will import everything I will use, and then we will start adding the components we need. So here's a place where we will add all Teams AI library components, and we will start by creating a state. And the first thing we will create is the conversation state. And we're getting some help from Copilot as well. We will use application turn state and default turn state for the conversation state. And then the next thing we will do is defining the AI library components. Okay, so let's start by adding the planner. And planner uses OpenAI key. We just added in the environment variables. We will define default model as text-davinci-003. And then we will define log request as true. Let's go ahead and add our OpenAI key into the config file as well, because we defined in the env. Okay, so let's continue adding more components. So the next step for us is defining the moderator. Moderator helps us moderate input and output of the bots. As Sid mentioned earlier, we'll use OpenAI key, and then we will moderate both input and output for our project. And finally, we will define prompt manager. It manages the prompt creation. And then we will create a path, and we will create a folder for prompts. Let's go ahead and create the prompts under our project root. And we will create our first prompt named chat. And we will add two important files under this. The first one is config.json, which will have all the settings about our prompt. I'll just paste it here. And the second thing we will create will be the text file. This file will contain all the prompts related to my app. And this bot is a expert in Teams app development and using terms related to cooking to teach people how to build Teams apps. Okay, so prompts are ready. Now we will define storage. And for this demo, I will just use memory storage. Finally, we are now ready to use all of the components in our app. We will define AI app, and we will use storage inside the AI. We will use planner, moderator, prompt manager, and then we will define prompt as chat, the folder that we just created. And history, we will define as assistant history type as text. All right, so let's also define some actions in our project before we test it out. We will use both input and output actions. Let's create the first one. And for this one, we will use AI.flag input action name. This will check if user says something wrong. So in this case, we can return anything like your message was flagged. And we can also do the same thing when bot says something wrong. We will just create the same thing, but we will use AI.flagged output action name. This one will be returned when bot says something wrong. That's why it's saying, I'm sorry, my response was flagged. Finally, let's create history. And here we will just call the history. And then we will call the conversation history. Okay, let's replace bot with the app we just created, save, and go back and test out. Now, this is different. I can say hi. It's not only comments anymore. And bot will introduce itself saying, my name is Chef Bot, and what's your name? I'll say, I'm Aicha. And then it will return as, great to meet you. Have you cooked a meal before? I will reply saying, of course. And then now I'm expecting, yes, so some descriptions related to how cooking is very similar to Teams app development. I can just ask where do I start, or different questions like what is a bot? Couple of questions at the same time, such as like what types of apps I can create, and it will reply right by using the prompt we just created. We can go on and on by asking questions. I just realized we're over time. And let's switch back to quickly Joey and wrap up the AI section, and we will quickly talk about what we have for tomorrow.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's great. I mean, it shows like how powerful and rich and simple it is to handle conversational logic with connective tissue to AI and to large language models. And that was perhaps the most complex piece of building a Teams app before this library. Now you can really just focus on the business logic that you're writing inside those actions. Like, so taking Sid's example of a light bot, all you need to do is focus on the actual business logic of turning those lights on and off. And the language models handle all the conversational complexity ahead of that. So just kind of reframing the wrap up here, we talked about plugins. Those are things coming soon. We focused mostly on the Teams AI library today. You can find lots of rich material getting started, documentation on that. And we're really excited to see what you guys hack together over the next week or so, or 2 weeks left. So thank you so much for your time. I'm going to pass it back to Aicha. I know we're a little over on time.
Thank you so much, Joy and Sid. Amazing session. Let me have my colleague Waldek back, and we will talk a little bit about what is coming up this week and next week. Let me share my screen really quickly. So in the upcoming sessions, we have one tomorrow for message extensions, and we have 2 others for next week. Waldek, would you like to quickly let us know what we are talking about tomorrow?
Totally, right? So we will talk about one more type of apps for Teams. We will talk about the messaging extension, and they're really excited because they enrich the way you can interact with Teams, right? So definitely check it out, because that might give you inspiration for the heck you want to build. And then another aspect that we'll look into is that we've learned over time that many apps for Teams that folks build want to tap into the data and insights that are stored in my Microsoft 365, and the API to do that is Microsoft Graph. So we will learn about how you can use that API from apps for Teams to tap into all of the data that we all create at work, at school.
Awesome. So excited for it. We will be here right at the same time tomorrow, introducing you message extensions and Microsoft Graph, as well, like mentioned. And until then, see you tomorrow. Thanks everyone for joining today's
See you
session.
tomorrow. Thank you.